The Queen's Jewish Link presents the Jewish Living Podcast, the show that examines the many facets of Orthodox Jewish life. Here's your host, Izzo Zwirin.
One way or another, the country is looking towards reopening in the wake of COVID. The reopening will come with a slew of conditions and requirements. And while we continue to live in 2-week blocks of time where we don't know what the next set of rules will be, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be bracing ourselves for what may happen. Having said that, it's time to discuss schools next year. Not from a programming standpoint, but from what is always going to be the issue concerning parents, tuition. And joining me to discuss it is this week's guest.
My name is Alan Steinberg. I am a professional real estate investor, but for many, many years, I was the director of development of Yeshiva Har Torah in Queens.
Parents are worried about all sorts of tuition-based issues going into next school year, from getting bang for your buck, to why not just send to public school, to should there be a tuition break even for those not in financial trouble? And Alan will discuss it all with us. Alan isn't speaking on behalf of Har Torah or any other school, but he does have years of experience dealing with yeshiva finances. One note, we did have some technical difficulties and had to change recording methods halfway through the interview, so there will be a break in the middle, but we'll warn you when it happens. All right, Alan, thank you so much for joining me today. As we always do on the show, let's get a little bit of a background on you. How did you become involved with Yeshiva Har Torah, and where are you up to right now?
So how I became involved with Yeshiva Har Torah is, first of all, I started sending my children to school, and Har Torah didn't have their own building at the time. So I was a parent of the school, and the children were being sent to a building that was they were tenants. The school was a tenant in a conservative synagogue on Long Island. I was a parent of the school, and I was a real estate investor. Very quickly, I started buying buildings on Long Island. In Woodbury, one of my tenants is wearing a kippah. Now, in Woodbury, I thought that was surprising, certainly 20 years ago. So I said to him, "Are you religious?" "Yes." And I said, so am I. "Where do you send your kids?" And he said, "I send my kids to Yeshiva Har Torah." As a matter of fact, my wife is the president of Har Torah, and now I'm his landlord. I said, "Are you kidding me?" And sure enough, they had discovered me, and they asked me to get involved in the school, and I did. And they asked me to get involved on the fundraising committee. And I said, "What do I know from fundraising?" They said, "Oh, join the committee." And I joined the committee, and they were going to putting on a carnival. And one thing led to another is that I said, I had graduated from Hank, and we just had Hank's golf outing. I said to him, "This carnival is so much work, and it could rain. Why don't we do a golf outing?" So that's when I started raising money. I started the golf outing at Har Torah 20 years ago. That was very successful, that they still have it to this day. And then very quickly, a few years later, when they started constructing a building, they needed somebody to help fundraising. So they hired somebody. It didn't work out. They asked me to be the capital campaign chairperson. And finally, we started building. And I said, "You know what? This is not happening. I'm raising so much money part-time." And they said, "What would you consider leaving your job?" And I actually took a leave of absence from my job. It was supposed to be 1 year. It turned out to be 2 years. And then a few years later, I came back and I became a full-time fundraiser for Yeshiva Har Torah.
Okay. Well, the reason that we're having you on this week is because we're talking about how schools raise funds, especially during a pandemic, and what we can do to ease the burdens of those funds next year, potentially, should schools go back to not being open the way they normally are.
Great. So you don't have me on video, so I'm not old enough to let you know how I raised funds during the previous pandemic. This is our first pandemic, although I did raise money during the 2007 to 2009 recession, so I had some experience there. So perhaps we can relate that. Why don't we just say that this may be a recession on steroids?
Okay. All right. So let's start with some obvious things that preceded COVID. Schools in general, you're involved with Har Torah, or you were involved with Har Torah, but schools in general, not necessarily Har Torah, but a lot of schools have financial issues to begin with. We've seen already a school closed since COVID happened, and I was wondering how schools should be building their financial stability in order to prevent something like this from completely knocking them out
Well,
indefinitely.
well, like I said, I'm a real estate investor and I have my own business. And I say everybody who's gone into COVID weak will have trouble coming out of it. Anybody who went into COVID stronger will survive it. A perfect example, retail in New York, a little tough going into it, it's going to have trouble getting out of it. Countries or states, California or New York, that had trouble financially will have trouble now. Florida, that was a little stronger. Same thing with yeshivas or day schools or any business. If their bottom line was stronger going into COVID, they'll probably be better coming out of it. If a school was not only had a bad cash flow, but had a big deficit, then this is going to be a bigger challenge for them. Not that they can't survive, but it just makes it more challenging. And not that a school that had a strong balance sheet is going to sail through this, because the truth is, I don't know what this is. Usually a recession, okay, recession. You even know a depression. This is not generated by the economics. This is generated by health issues. So therefore, we don't know what the future is going to be. That makes it more of a challenge for everybody, even day schools and yeshivas.
An added thing to that this year is that a lot of schools who had their one of their primary fundraisers, which would be a dinner, a lot of them were scheduled for this time of year in the April, May, June timeframe. Does the fact that the dinners didn't happen affect this past school year's revenue or next school year's revenue?
Well, usually, first of all, it's also not only dinners, but a lot of golf outings. A lot of schools now have golf outings.
Right.
This time of year. Generally, most schools operate on a fiscal year where their accounting ends on June 30th, because they like to line it up with their school year. So it might be July 1st to June 30th. So if they had a dinner scheduled for April, May, or April, May, June, or a golf outing, that's for this fiscal year, not for next year. And if they didn't have it, then they lost those funds. A lot of schools and a lot of shuls had some virtual dinners,
right,
where they still were able to collect a lot of the money, but they didn't have the in-presence honorees and so forth. But those funds impact this school year. Next school year is a different problem. Next year really starts July 1st for a lot of schools.
Right. So let's talk about the schools that are going to be starting their fiscal year starting July. Usually, that as a parent myself, that's when we start paying tuition. We start paying tuition for the following year in July, even though the school year doesn't start till September. We start paying it in July. A lot of parents are going to be having issues right now paying tuition. Yes, everybody has the thought of the parent that lost their job, that was furloughed, that maybe is earning less than they were before. But there's other aspects of this that are difficult for parents to come out of. Even parents that are still earning their regular income, they're working from home, but their children are at home. So it limits their ability to be involved with their children. Over the course of the summer, if there's no camps, the children will be taken away from, I'm wording it that way for these purposes, not to say that children are taking away from time from parents, but they're taking away from their ability to work. Additionally, there's a potential, as we had at the end of this year, there's a potential for there not to be school next year, for there to be, again, Zoom school. These are questions that we're going to have not already, but still once July comes. So what do schools tell parents who are either struggling financially or struggling to understand if they should be paying, because they're not going to be able to get the same services they used to out of the school?
So two parts. The first part is, you said that tuition is generally paid starting in July 1st for that school year. If you recall, maybe you don't have the experience yet, your kids are young, but very often there's a registration fee that's required. That's usually paid in January, February, or March for the next year. So a lot of people have already paid that, okay? And in my opinion, it could be $1,000 a kid, $1,500 a child, something like that. They've already paid that. So they really start before July 1st. So the question is, let's assume that's all of that's collected already.
Okay.
Right? And you can't assume that, but we're going to assume that for this discussion, that that's all done, that you have a certain amount of registered for next year. Now, what happens come July or July and August and for the year? So you touched on two questions or two issues, two very important issues. The first issue is ability to pay. Okay, ability to pay. And when you're dealing with parents of yeshiva parents or day school parents, they fall into three categories. One is they have plenty of money and they can pay anytime, anywhere, the rich ones. Then you have the lion's share, which is people who can pay, but they're on a budget,
Right.
majority of us. And then you have those who are on tuition assistance, I don't want to say in a disrespectful way, no matter what the economy is.
Right.
And it could be a mixed bag. Some people this year, some people next year. So there's three types of parents. Okay. So that's and therefore this will impact those three types of parents differently. Okay. Unfortunately, just like we talk about America, the middle class are the ones who get hurt the most because the parents who are wealthy, okay, so they'll pay. The people who can't pay, well, I couldn't pay last year either, so I want tuition assistance. They probably will need the same amount of tuitions. You mean the lower income, it's even worse for them? Maybe. But let's assume that they need it. So it's the middle class parents, which is a larger percentage. It's not like a third, a third, a third. It might be 10% the rich ones and 10%. So we're talking about 80% approximately of the people in the middle who really, really look at their budgets when they pay. Okay, so that's really what we're dealing with here. So you're asking me, how is that going to impact them? So the answer is, I would have to say that if you're taking the 80%, let's say the top 10 or 15% of them are going to fall into it. Okay, they're going to pay. And another 10 or 15% are going to maybe lose their jobs and may have to fall into the other category, tuition assistance. So now you have the people who can pay who may not pay. So let's deal with the other issue. The other issue is they may not pay because they feel, well, what am I getting? Is my child going to attend school in September like normal? Okay, then I'm going to get the same product. If I'm going to get what I got at the end of the last semester, which is Zoom school, social distancing school, okay, you kept my kids occupied, but they didn't really learn a lot. Now,
Right.
I appreciate the teachers had to work hard for that, but there was a lot lost in their translation. So what are parents going to do about that? Well, I can't really answer that totally because here it is, still the end of May, and we don't know what the product is going to be. The product, in my opinion, the product is either going to be the same school like it was last September, maybe. It could be something like it was recently, which is Zoom school, or it could be some combination of the two. And it could be a combination of the two, either in September, meaning we don't want to overload the schools because we want to have social distancing. So schools it's going to be part-time school and for some students and part-time, maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a few hours. I don't know. So it could be something different, or it could be all Zoom school in September, October, and regular school, let's say starting in January or February, right? We don't know.
Here's that break that I mentioned earlier.
We're at a period now. I'm a landlord professionally. I'm an investor. And when COVID came in early March and then got worse and worse and worse, by March 15th, everybody had already paid rent. So we had no idea how it was going to impact us until April 1st, right? When rents were due. Same thing now. We don't know how this is going to impact us in July. And maybe that's why you're having this conversation with me, is we don't know what July is going to look like. And we don't know what next year is going to look like. And each day in this environment is changing quickly. If you want to ask me, you want to give me different scenarios on how we different scenarios. I mean, either school is going to be like it was, or it's going to be very different, or somewhere in between. Like the three little bears, a little hot, a little cold, let in the middle. So I'm reading your mind. So why don't we take it? If school, like using our thumb in a Gemara, if school is going to be the way it was like in September, like last September, then we only have to deal with the people who need tuition assistance issues, right? And there are going to be more because a lot of people lost jobs or were furloughed or businesses took a hit and so forth. So there are going to be more people requiring tuition assistance. I don't want to say that's easy, but that's one issue to address, right? And we're going to offer this. We're going to offer the same product. But our customers, our parents, have changed because there have been financial situations. And so therefore, there's going to be an increase in demand of tuition assistance, just like there was in the recession of 10 years ago. That's one scenario.
Okay.
You're asking me to address a more complicated one, which is come July or the summer at some point, when we're going to be offering perhaps a different product in September. We're going to be offering perhaps the same that we're offering now, which is distance Zoom schooling, at least initially, or some combination of it, different from what the parents are used to, different from what the parents have paid for in the past, right? So that's what you really want to address. You want to address a question which is very timely, which is everybody is grappling with it right now. The schools are grappling with what kind of product are they going to offer. Parents are deciding on, well, if they offer a different product, should we be paying the same price for it? Which would you like me to address first? I get an idea. This is your show, not mine. You tell me. Which would you like to take it from the parents' perspective or from the school's perspective?
Let's start from the parents' perspective, because the majority of the people that listen to this show are not going to be school employees.
Okay, so let's talk about with the parents, right? So I'm a parent, you're a parent. Okay, if it's going to be a similar program to what we had last year, that's we know how to deal with that. But if it's going to be some kind of combination of distance learning and in-class instruction, then that's different. So therefore, what should I expect as a parent, right? So should I pay less for it? Well, is it less valuable to me? Meaning that I'm still going to get my rebbeim, and I'm still going to get my teachers, and I'm still going to get some classes. If I have an 8th grader, that's one thing. If I have a 12th grader, that's another. If I have a 1st grader, that's another, or a kindergarten. So now I'm sure you see where I'm going with this, is that if you go the higher grades that you go, let's say from nursery to 12th grade or from nursery to 12th grade, you're going to have a different level of learning, right? So if you said to me, you can't even do this in kindergarten or nursery, you just can't, all right? So I would have to say then that would be a problem, right? So therefore, I would say a parent would be not only probably would be reluctant to pay full tuition,
Right.
and therefore the school may say, okay, we may not have kindergarten or nursery. I don't know if you can do it. I don't know exactly. Like I said, I've been in the fundraising and the budgeting. I'm not on the board. I don't know what happened with reference to nursery and kindergarten the last couple of months. Do you? Because you have younger kids than I do. What happened to that? Was there any distance learning for nursery?
There's absolutely distance learning for kindergarten. I have a kindergartner and I have a nursery child. The kindergartner has a few hours in the morning, and maybe every once in a while there's a little bit more. And the nursery has like davening in the morning, and then maybe a project that we have to do with her later.
Okay, so I think, okay, so good. And therefore you would have to say that is, it was nice, but certainly not the same thing as a full day of school. It wasn't a full day of having your child not with you.
Right.
And I know that I've sent 6 kids through the yeshiva system, and I sent them there for 2 or 3 reasons mostly. I mean, obviously, I wanted them to get a good secular and a good Jewish education. That's no question. And I wanted them to have good values, no question. But also, why did I pick one school over another? It's because that classic saying, who is going to be playing with my children in the sandbox, right? Did my other kids come from similar homes with similar values and so forth? That's very important. So with distance learning, there's no sandbox, right? So therefore, I would have to say that there would be have to be some kind of adjustment in tuition for that. I would think that would be reasonable, certainly with the younger grades. And I think just like, and it's almost like virtual reality mimics reality, right? Because the tuition for nursery or the tuition for kindergarten is different than it is for 1st grade. And 1st grade is usually, so I know at Har Torah it is, maybe in other yeshivas it's not, it's graduated. It's not only different because the amount of learning is different. The quality of learning between, let's say, a 1st grader and an 8th grader is different. But also from a Har Torah standpoint, we would always think that the parents themselves are younger, and therefore their earning capacity is less than somebody who's in 8th grade. Their careers are not established, their business is not established, and so forth. So I would have to think certainly there would be some reduction in the tuition. But what's interesting, and this is what I wanted to share with you, is that there has to be some balance, right? Because most parents who send their children to a yeshiva day school do not want to see the yeshiva day school financially crumble, right? Okay, so that doesn't mean they're just going to write a blank check. I get it. This is not a tzedakah. But from the school standpoint, what reduction in their costs have been? Okay, yes, if they have Zoom learn, the teachers still have to do their lesson plan. The teachers still have to be on the Zoom, but there's no equipment, there's no facilities, there's no maintenance, there is some reduction in cost to the school if you're learning it this way. So I think that should be shared with the parents, and it probably will be. It's probably not going to be enough, meaning the school won't reduce it enough, and the parents won't think it's enough. But that's where the balance and fairness will have to come through.
Let me add to one thing that you were saying. So you mentioned the three reasons why you would send to a religious school, to a Jewish day school, to a yeshiva. It's the secular education, the Jewish education, and the playing in the sandbox. Playing in the sandbox we don't have. I would argue that we don't really have the same level of either of the other two things either.
You mean the quality of the education?
The quality of the education is nowhere near what would be. So here's where I'm going to go with this. I'm just going to cut. The parent who is anyway on the fence about sending to yeshiva in the first place will be more likely to go send to public school next year.
I would have to say that's a possibility. Yes, that's a possibility.
And we're not going to know these things until, not when that first tuition check is due. We're not going to know these things in July. Would a postponement in a collection of tuition be on the table, meaning we don't start collecting until August? Is that something that yeshivas can possibly do?
It could be possibly that something could be done. I would think so. I would think that that's possible. But keep in mind that I would have to say majority, nobody really thinks now at this point in time that the entire school year of next year is going to be distance learning.
Right.
I haven't heard that anywhere.
Correct.
Even on the college level, they talked about the first semester. So I would try to discourage strongly those parents who are on the fence about sending their kids to public school for two reasons. Number one is this is not a long-term situation. Number two is if you send your children to public school, children are not pawns or kings. They're not chess pieces. And you can't send a child to a public school because you want to park them there like a car and say, I'm going to park you in public school for 6 months, but then when Har Torah opens up, or all schools open up, then I'll send you back there. Now, granted, the kids could, miss Har Torah, and the parents could miss tuition. And when public school opens up in January, in that situation, just like Har Torah will open in January, there's a good chance that a lot of the parents may just send their kid to public school. And if the reason for that is because of tuition, they want to save the 4 or 5 months worth of tuition, I would rather address the money issue, because the money issue can be solved. Money is to be made, money could be lost, money, whatever. But once you lost a child into the public school system, you lose them on many different levels, culturally, emotionally, values, and so forth. So I, from a educational standpoint or from a yeshiva standpoint, would fight very, very hard to try to justify keeping those parents and those children in a yeshiva, because I would tell them that this is just temporary. And they'll come back and say, well, I don't want to pay full freight, okay? If they say I want to pay nothing, okay, because I'm getting, then I would have to say the answer is no. The answer is no. You're not getting nothing. What we are offering through distance learning is still better, because there'll be Hebrew distant learning that you wouldn't be getting in public school, and that has value. What that value is to that parent and what that value is to the school can be discussed and could frankly be negotiated, because don't we negotiate on other issues as well? But I think that a parent who thinks that it's the same thing. Why should I spend $3,000 or $2,000 or $1,000 a month at a yeshiva when I can get the same thing free in my local public school? They're not the same education, even distance learning.
Okay, so let me ask you about the ways that schools are going to be going about being able to afford to continue the education, with the possibility that a lot of their formerly paying customers are going to be paying reduced rates or something along those lines.
Okay, I want to circle that back. You just said a lot. I don't know if the answer is a lot. And the truth is, if the answer is a lot, the yeshiva will have trouble being viable. I'd like to think that it's not a lot.
Okay, so not a lot. Let's say more than they are now.
Granted.
Okay, granted, more than there are now will be paying less tuition than they are currently.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I imagine that there will be concurrent with this additional fundraising. It's not like the entire world has dried up. Money has shifted, right? So there are, not that if, let's say, one family is paying X, that they have to pay now more than X. There will be fundraisers, not only among the parent body, but up to the community. You will have to reach out to the communities, to the separate communities, to other foundations and so forth, to help keep the schools in business. But I would have to say that would fall into the category of additional scholarship money.
Okay, and I would go the other way in terms of maybe lowering the operating costs. Are there talks about things like furloughing employees? We mentioned certain employees that won't be necessarily needed. I'm not sure what we would do about them. Cooking staff, if they're there, security. I'm not sure how high we would go into employees that won't be needed during this time. I'm going to insult people by saying this, but I'll say it anyway because a lot of people are thinking about it. Assistant teachers that are sometimes there to help with the decorum of the class or to give individualized attention to students that can't really be done in the same way anymore. Any of those added specialty employees.
When we started this conversation, you asked me, you said, experience a pandemic. So the only thing that I had experienced was in 2007, 2008. And I do remember we had an immediate meeting to cut back on all expenses, right? Across the board. That doesn't mean slash everything 20%, okay? Right. But it could mean looking at 20% savings. It could be, yes, maybe you don't need the assistant teacher because the assistant teacher per se is not on Zoom, right? You might not need the assistant principal, okay? You might not need the assistant janitor. You might only need the assistant janitor because somebody's got to just take care of the building while even an empty building and keep it going. Right. So you might have to furlough them. You might have to, the executive director, even the principal, everybody might take a reduction in salary to subsidize this because better getting 80% of your salary than no percentage of your salary. And a lot of your parents aren't getting any salary. So I don't think when you're looking at slashing a budget for the purposes of safeguarding the financial viability of a business or the financial viability of a school, that anybody is safe.
All right, so I'm gonna just jump into one thing you said. I do want to point out my daughter's assistant teacher is on the Zoom calls that they're having right now, and she does take some kids to a different Zoom class. That does happen. I'm not saying that it's something that absolutely must happen across the board everywhere. The older the student, maybe the less likely, the less needed the assistant is. I don't know, not an educator, but I'm just saying that there are sometimes cases where assistants are needed.
So again, we're having this conversation about education. You're not an educator. You're a parent. I'm not an educator. I worked in education, but I'm not an educator. I worked in finances and I worked in fundraising.
Right.
I'm talking to you in terms and business management. So yes, if we had you may have it on your next program. If you had a principal of a school and he would say, "Oh, the assistant." He may say just the opposite of what we're saying. He may say, you know what, that assistant teacher is even more important during distance learning because they do a lot of the X, Y, Z to make sure that it's harder to teach, and therefore they're not helping necessarily the students per se. They're helping the teacher more so. So, like I said, we're not going to paint this with a wide brush. We're just discussing. We may think that obviously. I think we could both agree and go out on the limb and say, okay, I would have to say who's ever in charge of the lunch program isn't needed. Okay, that's pretty safe. All right.
Right.
It'd be hard to justify having somebody who's being paid, even if your lunch is prepared or catered there. Okay.
Right.
I don't think that's going to be necessary because there are no kids to eat it. So I think we could certainly say there, and there everything else. The copier machine might not be being used as much because the office staff isn't there, and all these, and maybe that contract. All things have to be looked at on a line by line item to manage the school as fiscally carefully as possible.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that we discussed a lot of added issues that parents are facing right now. We spoke about, working from home while also being there to guide your child to make sure he or she is doing their work. One thing that my wife and I were discussing, that an added cost to parents going on now, is the need to buy more activities for kids to do while they are not on Zoom school. So we're spending a lot of money.
I thought that's the grandparents' expense, actually. sending extra things to the grandchildren to help them learn.
Yes, for all grandparents out there, that is your job right now, to buy extra things for the kids to learn. If any grandparents are listening.
Yes, I could make that joke because I'm not a grandfather yet, and I could make a joke because I personally know your father-in-law. So,
that's right.
But the bottom line is I'm sensitive to that, and the truth is, some truths are said in jest, meaning, of course not. It's not the grandparents' responsibility. There are some people who don't have grandparents. There's some people whose grandparents are also in trouble financially because their stock portfolios are down and so forth. And frankly, there are a lot of grandparents who are, can't even leave the house because they're over 60 or 65 years old, and
there's also some grandparents that are no longer with us.
That's true too.
Yeah, so there's a lot of so parents are facing these issues of these added expenses, and some that may come up that we don't even know what they are yet.
I do believe I'm an optimist, and I do believe that that this, we're not talking something that's going to change our lives for the next 3 or 4 years. I think we're talking, hopefully talking maybe over the next 3 or 4 months. So this is not necessarily like, this is an earthquake. I'm not minimizing it, but I do believe that we will rise from this sooner than a few years out. I think we're talking a few months out. So I don't even think we're talking a full school year. So we have to keep that in perspective also. And a lot of the people who have been laid off, I think will get a good percentage, perhaps will get jobs back, and their businesses will recover. Not a lot of parents work in restaurants, perhaps a lot of parents own restaurants, and they may not be able to fully, 50% capacity does nothing to a restaurant because their profits are only after they have 75%. So these challenges are real. And I think that you're having this discussion for your listeners is critical. It's good. It's healthy. But things are moving quickly. So, you may say to your listeners, we're looking at the end of May. Perhaps we should visit this at the end of June, because look at how differently it is from the end of April and how at March. So things are changing. And things are changing in some ways for the better. I'm not saying that things are rosy, not sure, but I don't necessarily we have to shift gears and say that this is the new reality that we're in. I mean, there are some camps that have not even canceled yet.
Right.
Okay? Meaning, so there could be some camps, and I think we could learn a lot by that. Meaning that if some camps, day camps or sleepaway camps, are open, we will have to learn 2 things from them. How do they deal with this social distancing in camp, number 1. And number 2 is hopefully that we don't have that there are not children or counselors getting sick by it, right? So if we start seeing that there's a good camping experience, I would have to say that there's more likely that there's going to be a more positive schooling experience.
Okay, so we spoke about a lot of things. I'm just going to recap a bunch of the things that we spoke about. I might miss some things out. I didn't write everything down while we were talking, but we spoke about the ways that schools are going to have to go about raising funds that might be different than before. We spoke about the way that schools are going to have to be thinking about their staffing and cutting costs. Right?
Both at the same time.
At the same time. We spoke about parents who might consider sending to public school, parents who aren't going to be wanting to pay the same in tuition. I'm not sure if there's anything else that we spoke about, but let's say those are the main things. You and I, we already got through it. You are no longer in the fundraising position that you once were.
Right.
Right. In an official capacity.
That's correct.
You mentioned that neither of us are educators. I actually have a degree in education. I used to be a teacher, but I am no longer a teacher. We're no longer in those education capacities that we used to be in once upon a time. And you and I are having this conversation. Do you think that all of these discussions that we're having are being heavily considered by every school, or is this just something that parents are talking about that we hope that the schools are talking about?
Absolutely. Every school is talking about this. Every school. From nursery to graduate school. Every school is talking about this now. Everybody is talking about this.
All of these suggestions that we're talking about, that you said that schools are going to have to lower tuition to a certain extent, that schools are going to...
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Okay.
What I did say very firmly is that all schools will have to cut back on their budgets and their expenditures for sure. If no school does that, they will be in a tough situation.
But you also said they'd have to pass those along to the parents.
I said they could pass those on. Okay. I said with reference to schools, some schools will be lowering tuitions, maybe. I think the first, I don't know if all schools will be lowering tuition. I never said that. What I said is they have to review it. I do think, because I did see an email even this evening from a high school, that they are foregoing their increases, right?
Yes, we got that from my kid's school as well.
Right, okay. So that's the first step. That is low, because the truth is they didn't necessarily go to their teachers and say, okay, the salary increase of 3%, big deal. But to a teacher, it's cumulative. So the salary increase that we offered you on your contract, that's off the table now. They haven't done that as far as I know. And certainly, I don't know, but certainly they have reduced the increase of the tuition. Whether they start reducing tuition, I don't know. That's probably on a case-by-case issue. That could be on a school-by-school issue. That could be on a grade-by-grade issue, as we had discussed. I don't know. You know, what's interesting is that, again, I always go back to my business mind said, do you know what interest rates are going to be next year? Well, I would have to say, well, are you a borrower or a lender, right? So the same thing here is that, can I make an argument that schools should not be reducing tuition? Yes, I can, because they need to be viable. Social learning is viable. It's not as good product, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And it's not long term. In a couple of months, I do believe you're getting back. Oh, maybe if it continues, if it continues, well, parents pay each month. But I could make an argument that they shouldn't reduce tuition. I could also make an argument maybe there should be. But I know that schools are, board of directors are, committees are all discussing all these things each day as things change. So I know parents are thinking about it all the time as well, but schools are as well. I've heard those discussions. I've been part of some of those discussions.
Alan, is there anything else you'd like to leave us with before we say goodbye? I know I promised you an hour. It's been a little bit longer than that as the recording is going on. I know you're going to charge me for this, so.
Well, that's okay. What I'd have to say is that I don't have rose-colored glasses, right? I don't think everything is going to be great, but I don't think that, what's interesting is that everybody wants school to be normal next year, but everybody wants a tuition break. Look, everybody wants a tuition break no matter what it is, right? Everybody thinks tuition is too high. But the truth is, especially if you compare it to public school, whether your tuition is $8,000 a year, $12,000, I'm not talking about New York City schools, yeshivas where they charge $30,000. I'm talking about on Long Island and suburbs, where your tuition is, let's say, $12,000, $13,000, $15,000. But if you add up, or you find out what it costs in public school, it's a lot more than that. Yeah. You're paying it through your taxes. So yeshiva tuition is not that high relative to what you're getting. And I think there's going to be a balance between the parents who want full product and schools that are going to try to deliver that full product in whatever way possible. And this way, there's not a reduction in tuition. And I think there's going to be a real fight on behalf of the schools to get the kids back into the school whatever way possible. For two reasons. One is that's the best way to educate them. And two is so they don't have to reduce tuition. Okay. And I think, and I'm hoping that that's the case. And there is enough time to do that. School doesn't start July 1st. And like I said, let's see how camps are going to have to decide in the next 3 weeks, right? If they're going to open. And let's see how the summer goes. And if the summer goes better than we think and businesses start opening better than we think, then I do think that in September, schools will be open, like with regular school, but there will be some social distancing requirements of the school. I do not think it'll be distance learning. If I had to guess, I don't think in September there'll be total like it is now. I think kids will be showing up. They may be different. There may be different ways of doing it, but I do believe that schools will be open in September. Part of it is from what I hear, and part of it is that's what I hope, because it's better for the children.
Absolutely. I would also assume that there might be a little bit of outdoor classes, a little bit more of an extension of outdoor classes. I think that students would like that too.
Which, just like shuls that are opening soon and having outdoor minyanim, it happens to work that in September, October, even November, you could do a little bit more outside learning than you can, and hopefully this will a little bit better situation come November, December, and January. That's correct.
Absolutely. All right. Alan,
Okay.
thank you so much for your time, and stay safe. Tomorrow, I believe that the Long Island gets to start phase 1, opening up.
Just in line with what we discussed, things are improving, and let's hope with God's help and that things continue to improve. Less people get sick, and more people are healthy, and we can go back to a more new normal for all of us.
All right, Alan, stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks. Always a pleasure.
My thanks to Alan Steinberg for joining me this week and to give some of his understanding about how yeshivas and day schools are approaching this unprecedented situation. While he does not speak for any specific school, it's good to know that parents aren't the only ones grappling with these questions. Like everyone else, I hope the situation sorts itself out over the summer so we can get back to some level of normalcy soon. Hope you are all staying safe, and until next time, as always, Kol Tov.
The Jewish Living Podcast is produced by Swirly Pikus. Our theme song is The Band by A.B. Rottenberg from Journeys 4. You can email the show at jewishlivingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at Jewish_living. The Jewish Living Podcast is recorded in conjunction with the Queen's Jewish Link.
Get to it.
All right,
Okay.
Great. So let's start it this way. Say, you have to introduce yourself. So you're going to say, my name is Alan Steinberg, and I'm blank.
Ba-dum-bum-bum. Okay, that's the Johnny Carson music introducing it. Okay. Dun, dun, da-da, dun, da-dun, da-da. Is there any music here?
There's music before and after, but you're not going to hear it during this interview. It'll be played.
I got an idea. Okay, I'll kind of be a little bit more serious. Go ahead. I'm ready. Go ahead.
Okay.